Dark News.
Dark News.
Broadcast. This is a show about cryptocurrencies, darknets,
Anonymity.
And uncensorship.
Alright, and we are live for today's episode of Dark News number 001. Today is April 1st, 2014. And we're going to talk about the latest stuff going on with darknets and underground markets and Tor and anonymous cryptocurrencies and all that great stuff. So I'd like to start off today by taking a look at the markets since last week. So today we have a number of commodities to look at. First, silver is trading on a slight decrease from last week. All of these are put in terms of dollars. So $1 is currently trading for 1.57 grams of silver. That's down about that's up about 1.29%. The dollar is up 1.29% since last week relative to silver. $1 is trading for 24.28 milligrams of gold, up about 2%. $1 is trading for 2.06 millibits, which is up a significant amount, 19.77% since last week and about 35% since a couple weeks ago. This is mainly being driven by possibly fake news related to China and whether the government will be banning the exchange of Bitcoin for the Chinese yuan. Dark coin is trading right now $1 for 1.46 dark coins. That's up about 32% last week. Now, dark coin is relatively stable for a small altcoin relative to Bitcoin. So most of that increase is due to the increase of the dollar relative to millibits. And 22 LR rounds, you can get 6.67 of them per dollar. That's down quite a bit since last week. Basically, just these are going to go up and down a substantial amount from week to week as there are sales and so forth. But over time, we should see a pretty even trend until something majorly changes with the economy. And the dollar can also buy you 4.42 9mm Luger rounds as well. No change since last week, and about a 4% increase overall since a couple weeks ago. And the total market cap for gold, silver, Bitcoin, and Darkcoin is at $226.94 trillion, and that's down a little bit, around 2% since then. And in fact, if we take a look at the Darkcoin price chart, we can see that over the last month or so, it's been trading somewhere between around 0.00125 and 0.00175 Bitcoins. So no astronomical increase in Darkcoin yet. Mostly sideways movement, perhaps a upwards trend overall. And that's the current situation with the markets. So let's talk about the Dark Tools update. The Amnesic Incognito Live system, otherwise known as Tails Linux, has been updated to version 0.23. In addition to the usual security updates that we get with all of these security releases, version 0.23 by default assigns your computer with randomized fake hardware serial numbers using a technique called MAC address spoofing. This makes it more difficult for any malware that infects your Tails operating system to identify your computer uniquely, and it also helps to protect your anonymity from people that you may share a local network with, which is, for example, a very important consideration when you are using public Wi-Fi hotspots. Now, the next version of Tails Linux is scheduled for April 29th, and it's going to be a major release to version 1.0. This is usually a version number reserved for when developers believe their software has reached a significant level of maturity, and it's good news for users who want a well-designed and well-maintained package for accessing the Tor privacy network. On a related note, the Tor browser team has released version 3.5.3 of their software. The team has really made some strides recently in making the browser more like a standalone application and less like a bundle of applications as it once was, which has prompted them to rebrand the project from Tor Browser Bundle, which you may have heard of, to simply just Tor Browser. And I think that usability improvements in the space are fantastic because they just make Tor that much more accessible to the average computer user. Now for our next story on Dark News. Richard Clarke believes that Snowden should be in prison. So, former White House advisor and security theater guru Richard Clarke was reported by Dark Reading as calling for the permanent imprisonment of whistleblower Edward Snowden. And now a part-time writer of military erotic fiction and a full-time professional grump, Clarke claims that the NSA has not abused its power and that Snowden's leaks have enabled enemies of the United States federal government to evade its surveillance tactics. Now, what I really want to talk about with this story is what Richard Clarke left out. So he pointed out that there are certain so-called adversaries of the United States government, but what he didn't talk about is who else has been able to adjust their communications to evade surveillance by the US government and similar spy agencies. So what about the citizens of the world that are able to evade the panopticon of the state worldwide? I think that's something that's quite relevant and a telling omission on his part. And so also several times in these speeches in which he was quoted, he invoked terrorism, but not once did he discuss returning troops from abroad or the dissolution of the organization that funded and trained the rebel army in Afghanistan that would years later fly buildings into inside of the United States. They would fly planes into buildings inside U.S. borders. I think that's also very telling that he didn't mention those elements whatsoever at all. Clearly, the problem from his viewpoint is with these damn whistleblowers that are confounding our ability to deal with terrorism and not the root causes of terrorism. Now, Richard Clarke is well known for being an advisor to the White House and later on coming out as a type of critic for the Bush administration. Clarke himself considers himself a Democrat, a member of the Democrat Party. And his criticisms of the Bush administration were primarily around the degree to which they were prepared to deal with terrorism. The fact that they did not stop the 9/11 terrorist attacks despite some warnings about that, obsessing with going to war in Iraq. And I think that to view Richard Clarke as a critic of the Bush administration is really to miss the larger picture here. Because really what he's talking about is I think that we should continue to have a massive surveillance and war state, but I have some strategic, issues with the way that this particular administration approached it. And he's not talking about the root causes. Where did this organization come that declared war on the United States in the form of Al-Qaeda? What's the history of that? Why would they want to attack the United States? And who exactly are their adversaries? Is it the entire body of everyone living on the North American continent? Or is it really a particular set of individuals that claim to have control and dominance over that continent? Personally, I think it's more the latter. So I don't think that Richard Clarke is a sincere critic of the Bush administration or of what's going on with respect to the United States government and terrorism and surveillance. Really, Snowden is a much more clear critic, and he's someone that actually did something about it. He dropped his cushy job, and he fled the United States and took his chances with reporting this to the international, journalists. So, in light of the actions of the U.S. military-industrial complex over the last several decades, I can't help wondering, how exactly will the future judge the actions of human beings today? How will they look at the actions of someone like Edward Snowden, who decided that the information that he had access to was better suited for the hands of the average citizen rather than being kept entirely secret by a small number of individuals with common interests? And how will they judge someone like Richard Clarke, who I think is essentially a professional bullshit shoveler? So, moving on to the next story, let's talk about timing attacks on Tor. Security researcher Jan Horn recently created a proof-of-concept tool while exploring practical attacks on Tor anonymity, and he wrote about this on the full disclosure mailing list in the last couple days. And in essence, his tool is based on the class of attackers on Tor that require the attacker to have access to both local user traffic that watches users connect to the Tor network and also access to internet services like websites that Tor users are connecting to from their exit nodes. So just a reminder of how Tor works. You are connecting to the Tor network. You're getting bounced around a random number of times between random nodes in the Tor network who don't know who you are. And finally, you'll get to what's called the exit node. And that person will basically shuttle your traffic to the regular internet. And you can temporarily assume their identity. And in doing so, you're protecting your anonymity. So what this guy is doing is he's compelling a user, a Tor user, to send distinctive bursts of traffic. For example, when loading a web page in a web browser, the attacker can try to identify traffic based on those bursts. And he proved that there is, it's practical to perform these kind of attacks. They are limited in that only certain kinds of attackers with certain kinds of abilities can perform the attacks. And it raises a couple interesting points, I think, to look at both the geopolitical perspective and what people can do about it. So what I want to talk about next is this Five Eyes organization, also known as the UK-USA community. And what it is, it's an consortium, a collaboration of spy agencies working for national governments. This includes Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and of course the United States of America. And what they do is they share information between their spy agencies. In some cases, they do this because they have complementary abilities. In some cases, it's a way to get around laws, because some countries have laws that you can't spy on your own citizens, but there are no laws against sharing information with spy partners. And so if everyone spies on each other's countries and share this information, it's a way of completely circumventing that legal restriction. Now, how is this relevant to the Tor research that this guy is doing? In order to do this type of attack, you have to see people going into the Tor network and coming out of the Tor network. And it's difficult to achieve that because Tor is this global network. But if you have someone that's using Tor network from Australia, Canada, New Zealand, United Kingdom, or the United States, then those spy agencies have all shown that they have the capability to perform, to collect that kind of data about people. They can see that people are connecting to the Tor network. And they've also shown the capability to do man-in-the-middle attacks on people connecting to websites. They've shown the capability to set up fake websites to convince people to connect to them. They certainly have the capability to generate this kind of bursty traffic data surreptitiously for users. So if you live in one of those countries and you're using Tor, this is a potential problem for you. And I would definitely bet that the NSA and similar organizations are using this type of technique to attempt to identify some Tor users, maybe on a broad scale, maybe on a purely targeted basis. We don't know. Now, they didn't talk about this in the docs that were released so far by Snowden about Tor, but keep in mind that all of those documents that are being released by Edward Snowden are several years old. I think that the main documents that were leaked that dealt with Tor specifically were in the ballpark of like 3, 4, 5 years old. So the NSA has, of course, adapted their techniques since then. And this is kind of an obvious attack on Tor, and so I would definitely bet that they're taking this kind of, using this kind of technique. So what can you do if you're in one of these countries? Well, what you can do is you can layer a VPN service. A VPN is virtual private network service on top of Tor. So in this case, you'd be connecting to your VPN service first, and then from there you'd be connecting to the Tor network. And what the VPN service does is it's basically changing the geographic point where you're accessing the internet. So where your VPN service is located and where it's dropping you out on the internet is very relevant, because if you're in the United States, you're using a VPN service that drops you out in Canada, then you haven't necessarily gotten any better privacy when you're connecting to the Tor network or just for your internet traffic in general. In fact, in some cases, you may have damaged your privacy in some ways, because if you live in a country where it's illegal for them to collect specific data about you, but then you move over to one of the partner countries with your traffic, that might not be illegal. And of course, they can just share that information back with your host country. So it's very important to take a look at where your VPN service is dropping you out onto the internet, and usually they'll tell you specifically. If you're not sure, you can go to a website, just Google for like, what is my IP address, or IP address geolocator, or anything like that, and it will tell you where you appear to be connecting to the internet from. And that's another step that you can take to protect your use of Tor. And for our last story of the day, I want to talk about a new dark market that's opened up. It's called DarkBay. I haven't used this website myself. I haven't purchased anything, that probably wouldn't dare to do so. But I did take a quick look at the website, and the interesting thing about it, it's a new dark market website. And last week on Dark News episode number 000, I talked about the Silk Road 2.0. And after the Silk Road 2.0 got hacked, one of the things that their admin, codenamed DEFCON, emphasized to the community was that they were going to drop their escrow system until it could be replaced by a more secure multi-signature version of the escrow. And so this is a new dark market that is apparently implementing a type of escrow system just like that. And I think it's very interesting to see that a lot of these black market sites are innovating so very quickly. So they're selling pretty typical stuff there. It seems most to be the most popular thing that they're selling is marijuana and some other various drugs. This is their cannabis category. They're selling Durban poison, California medical marijuana seeds, blueberry autoflower seeds, and so on. And as you can see, when you go to confirm an order for purchasing something, you can choose a escrow method, and one of them is the Multi-Sig escrow method. Now, let's talk about exactly what a Multi-Sig escrow is. I'm going to read this from btcrow.com. This is a non-black market website that facilitates Bitcoin multi-signature escrows. And in this section of their website, they're specifically talking about what are called 2 of 3 multi-sig transactions. So 3 signature Bitcoin transactions involve 3 addresses being created, also known as public keys. The public keys and the addresses are somewhat synonymous. And this includes the escrow holder or officer. With only 2, the payment is held in account, requiring 2 private keys in order to release it. When you have a 3 signature transaction, any 2 of the 3 private keys can be used to release the payment. So if we take an example, Peter agrees to set up a website for Paul at a certain price. They agree for the payment to go into escrow, with a third party being chosen to arbitrate in the event of a dispute, just like a normal escrow works. And they choose Mary for this because they both trust her to do the right thing and to fairly arbitrate between the 2 of them. And if an address will be set up by Paul, and then he'll also set up some rules for including, he'll include some rules in the setup. So there's 3 signatures that are going to be basically private keys, and those are used to release funds to Peter. One of the private keys is going to be held by Peter, one by Paul, and one by Mary, and any 2 of the signatures can release the payment. So basically, what this does is if Paul is dissatisfied with Peter, he can refuse to sign and basically refuse to use his private key in order to pay. But he doesn't just get the money back automatically. If Peter claims that he did the work as was requested, then it goes to Mary to kind of decide as the arbitrator who is right and who is wrong. So if everything goes smoothly, then Peter and Paul, they both sign the transaction, the payment goes through. If there's a dispute, then it falls on Mary to actually do it. And Mary also cannot steal the funds. She can't make it go through automatically because she only has 1 of the 3 keys, and you need at least 2 of them. So in the event of a dispute, Mary's going to look at any signed contracts about the order that was filled out, any kind of paperwork, and she'll decide what should be done in that case, whether Paul should be paid or whether Peter gets a refund. So that is it for news items for the dark news today. If you're watching this on YouTube and you have a Google account, what you can do is you can click the link to view the Hangout Live, and you can ask questions and answers through the Google Hangout interface. First question from Jeff. Do you have any idea of how well the NSA is storing the data? I assume that he is referring to data pertaining to the Tor network. So Jeff, let me know if you are talking about different data, but what do we know about how well the NSA might be storing data relevant to the Tor network? Well, we don't know that they're necessarily storing data or how much. For a long time, we've had a suspicion that they are running malicious exit nodes for the purpose of data collection. Exit nodes are an interesting place to collect data because anything that's sent in the clear text is going to be seen by the exit node operator. So you can actually just sit as an exit node and watch traffic, and you'll see all kinds of usernames and passwords and credentials and whatnot passing through. And it's a free. This is something that's completely free. You don't have to tap AT&T or any underground sea cables in order to do this. So it's a very convenient place to start collecting data. And of course, if you want to attack the users of Tor as well, it's an interesting place to perform man-in-the-middle attacks as well. Certainly the Tor project attempts to identify when this type of stuff is happening. They won't be able to tell when data is being collected, but they can sometimes identify when exit nodes are being naughty and they need to be dropped from the network. So we don't know if they are if they are collecting data about this kind of timing analysis from websites. As far as I know, we haven't seen any examples in the live proven that people are collecting this type of this kind of data. What we would expect to see is sometimes people would go to websites, they would see bursty traffic, they'd see some JavaScript or a curl operation or whatever to access information in a particular way. And no one has come forward and said, hey, look, I've seen people doing this. So we don't know if they're definitely collecting this data or not, but it seems likely that they would. And of course, since they prefer to be surreptitious, then they would probably do their best to hide the fact that they're collecting this type of data. I think it would be an interesting open research project to be on the lookout as a Tor node visiting websites, looking for websites that look like they are attempting to generate this distinguishable, bursty kind of traffic and collecting data about that. I think that would be quite cool. Next question. Should serious trading websites like BTCE be flipping their sites upside down for April Fool's Day? Yeah, I'm with the April Fool stuff. I'm not really that big of a fan of it. I find it to be, there's a fine line. Some of the stuff is funny, but when it gets to be confusing what is true and what's not, I'm not really into the trolling stuff so much. And when it gets into interfering with normal operations of websites, not so much a fan of that as well. So here's an okay April Fool's joke. I think I went to Bitcoinity earlier. That's a market tracking website with graphs and stuff like that, and they had put a link back up to the Mt. Gox prices, and if you actually just click on it, you go to kind of like a funny trolling video on YouTube. But it doesn't stop you from actually using the website. Doing something like flipping the website upside down and making you do some extra work, to me, that it doesn't make me want to use an exchange. It doesn't make it look like a serious business to me. That's certainly not what corporation's going to be doing. You're never going to see Bank of America flipping their website upside down on April 1st. So I'm not so much a big fan of that. I think it's, we're still in this part of the market growth in Bitcoin where we haven't hit the big time, right? So we don't have to act like Bank of America exactly, but Bitcoin is serious. It's a world-changing technology, and if you have a major exchange like BTCE, I think it's really important to take yourself somewhat seriously. Another question. Any comments on the news story that Raytheon is accepting Bitcoin? Should large weapons manufacturers be selling weapons anonymously overseas in exchange for Bitcoins? Well, that's a funny little April Fool's story. I think that Raytheon's doing pretty good with the dollar. I think that they're really, because they are producing weapons for warlords. A lot of those warlords are based in the United States, but a lot of times this stuff gets sold abroad as well. United States is a huge distributor of weapons to other countries, and definitely one of the major features of the military-industrial complex is to sell to both sides of foreign wars, or to provoke wars by equipping one side more lopsidedly, such as Israel. So I think that Raytheon is in terms of arms dealers, they're doing pretty well with the dollar. That's working out well for them. I don't think they need to switch to Bitcoin. They don't really even need to use cash either. They don't need to be anonymous. We live in a world where, for the most part, people are unaware of what Raytheon is doing, or they're simply they're kind of okay with it. Another great question. So this question is about I2P. The viewer writes in, I checked out I2P a year or two ago, but never checked Tor. Do you have any pros and cons for each service? This is a great question. I have thought a bit about this question. This is something that I researched and wrote about in my book, Anonymous Bitcoin, because I wanted to tell people, this is the privacy network that you should use. This is the best one. So I looked at both I2P and Tor, and let me give you the skinny on it. So they're both very similar services in that you are assuming someone else's identity, and there's kind of this peer-to-peer network. You're being bounced around randomly inside the network. Your traffic is being bounced around in an encrypted form. But the particular algorithms for bouncing that traffic around are a bit different between Tor and I2P. So Tor uses onion routing, and I2P uses something called garlic routing, which is kind of similar to onion routing, but it's a bit different. I'm not going to try and off the cuff give a technical explanation of exactly what the difference is between the two, but they're a bit different. I think in many ways, garlic routing is an incremental improvement on onion routing. So it could be in the future that I2P is the superior privacy network to use over Tor, because in some ways the technology that's underlining it is an improvement on where Tor started out. But I wouldn't recommend that people necessarily use I2P over Tor, and here's why. So Tor is a very well-funded project. It's been around for many years. It's been analyzed by national government spy agencies that are actually using Tor to hide their identities. Of course, spy agencies actually have spies out there in the world, and they need to contact home base somehow and to put out information, and so they actually rely on networks like Tor. It's also been looked at quite a bit by the academic community, and when there are new practical attacks that come out on Tor or new vulnerabilities that are identified, and there have been plenty of those, the developers are quite good at fixing them in a prompt fashion. So it's a very mature software that's being developed. And I think that's a really good reason to use Tor. I2P does not fall in that category. It has a much smaller user base. It has not been analyzed to the same extent. It doesn't have the same usability in its software that I2P has. So if you use, for example, with Tor, there's the Tor browser, formerly known as the Tor browser bundle, as I said earlier, which you can download. You can download it for Mac, you can download it for Windows and Linux and so forth. And it's really a very easy way to start using Tor for the web. There's also at least two operating systems that are Linux-based that incorporate Tor into their networking. The one that I like the most is Tails, which is a live system. And there's also another one called Unix, which is more designed for the use with virtual machines and more intended for permanent, persistent use. It's not a live CD configuration that you're booting off of, so your files sort of persist on the Unix operating system over time. And I don't know about Kunix, but I do know for Tails that they do include I2P software in the operating system, but I think you have to do a bit more extra stuff in order to actually use I2P with Tails instead of Tor. I've seen some traffic on the Tails mailing list suggesting that it could use quite a bit more integration and updating and so forth, and so far I haven't seen anyone take the lead on that project. And I've never heard of anything like the I2P browser bundle that you can download for any operating system and in a few clicks, start accessing the web through I2P right away. So that's not to say that I2P is not a useful thing. I'd love to see more development of it, love more crowdfunding of the project, and I'd like it to compete with Tor so that we have a competition, a healthy competition, and a number of things to choose from if anything happens with Tor. Of course, one of the common criticisms or suspicions with Tor is that a lot of their funding comes from the U.S. government and from the U.S. military in particular, and so people that want to follow the money are very suspicious of what Tor is doing. So far, we haven't seen any evidence that there have been any backdoors inserted or bribes taken or anything like that, but it's something to be wary about, and I don't think that's the case for I2P. So I'd love to see more of I2P, but if you're looking for one solid privacy network to choose from, peer-to-peer privacy network, I would definitely go with Tor over I2P. I hope that answers your question. So this one is from Jeff again. Why weren't more people arrested when the Silk Road was brought down by the FBI? That's a good question. So we don't know a ton about exactly what the FBI got when they took down the Silk Road. We also don't know exactly who was involved with taking down the Silk Road. Was it just the FBI, or were there many other agencies that involved? Something that has been going on over the last few years is that law enforcement agencies are getting data from other kinds of organizations like the NSA, and that's helping them go after people. And they use it as evidence, and then what they do after the fact, I'm trying to think of the term that they use for this, but basically once they receive information from a place like the military, from the NSA or whatever, what the NSA says to them is, look, it's really important that you come up with an alternative story about how you obtained your evidence in this investigation. Don't mention the NSA, don't mention the military. It can't be known that any of this stuff is coming from us because it might be illegal. Lots of people would object to it, and it might challenge the integrity of our spy operations. So then the FBI has to come up with a story about how they obtained this information all by themselves. So what we've learned from the FBI is that they have a story that basically, some of their agents did old-fashioned police work. They hunted down Ross Ulbricht, based on Ross Ulbricht is the alleged DPR running Silk Road and Silk Road 1.0. And so they found some posts that he had made on some forums and whatnot a little while ago. And based on that, they were able to connect it to Ross's personal identity. And then they were able to there was some interception of some stuff that he ordered, probably through Silk Road, in terms of fake passports and fake, official documents and so forth. Based on that, they were able to figure out where he lived, and doing some more digging around, they found the hosting service for the Silk Road and whatnot. The details of it are still a little bit fuzzy, and of course we don't know if any of this is really true. This may be a story that they came up with after the fact. So there's a lot of questions with relation to the Silk Road takedown. We do know that the FBI and any partnered organizations were able to operate the Silk Road for a while after seizing control of it. Since they seized control of it, that's what allowed them to put up that classic this website has been shut down page. And so they may have been collecting data passively for a while. They certainly have dumps, unencrypted dumps of the data pertaining to the website. So they have forum posts. Since the Silk Road is a Tor hidden node, they will have somewhat limited information in terms of IP addresses and so forth, because you simply can't connect to the Silk Road, or you couldn't connect to the Silk Road with your regular browser. You had to do it through Tor. And so that's good news. But I believe that if there were people that were communicating, buyers and sellers, and they were communicating physical addresses, mailing addresses, and possibly their personal names and so forth, then if they were not taking extra steps to do so, this would be stored unencrypted on the servers that were seized by the FBI. So I believe in a lot of cases the FBI has a list of basically items that were purchased, where they were mailed to, and they may be able to identify where they were mailed from. So why haven't more people been arrested? Well, there have been some. There have been some sellers that worked, that sold on the Silk Road 1.0 that were arrested. This happened in the United States, in the UK, I think maybe in Australia and a couple other places. There may be more arrests in the works. It may be that they need to, when the FBI wants someone to get arrested that lives, for example, in Russia, then there's this jurisdictional issue where they have to convince Russian officials to let them come in there and arrest someone, or they have to let Russia arrest them, and then there's kind of a fight over who, are they going to be extradited, under what laws are they going to be prosecuted, all that stuff. So there's lots of reasons that could slow down these kind of investigations that would lead to more arrests. We haven't seen arrests of possibly any, if there have been any arrests, very few of just Silk Road users. People are not selling, but they're just buying. And I suspect the main reason for that is because of the sheer number of people that are buying through the Silk Road. And it's probably more difficult in court to prove that someone purchased drugs with bitcoins with the intent to receive them and use them and so forth, as opposed to proving in court that someone simply was manufacturing drugs and selling them. There's probably harsher penalties for the selling and so forth. So there's lots of reasons that make it more attractive to go after the sellers as opposed to the buyers. So I would say those are probably some of the main reasons. It's also possible that the more people that they went after, the more that they would potentially unravel their fake story about how they took down the Silk Road. That's another possibility that I wouldn't necessarily rule out. I think we'll find out a lot more once Ross actually goes to trial and the state is forced to bring evidence against him. Are most of the Tor and other crypto tech users in the West and developed world? Is there a user base in third world and developing countries? That's a good question. I do believe that quite a few of the Tor users are in the West. There are actually some Tor tracking websites. So I'm on the Tor metrics portal, which is at https://metrics.torproject.org. And let's see, they have some graphs and stuff. 10 countries by directly connecting users. So top is the United States, 12%, Germany, 8.6%. Interestingly enough, Brazil is after that. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the Brazil use happened after the Snowden documents started getting leaked. I think that would be interesting to take a look at. France is another country where it's quite popular for nerds to be using privacy technologies, so I'm not surprised to see that. Similar story for Spain and so forth. United Kingdom is actually pretty far down. Russia and India as well. India just has a very large number of people living there, so per capita, probably not very high. And let's look at some of the data for Brazil. Yeah, so huge spike in Brazil taking place between July and October of 2013. And so, yeah, I do believe that the Snowden documents basically sent up the Brazilian user base from, around probably 25,000 to a height max of 500,000, and now it's settled back down to around 150,000 or so. So that's exactly what I expected to see. I think that the developing world has a lot of good reason to use privacy networks like Tor. They have some of the worst governments in terms of not only just surveillance, but really stiff ramifications for being surveilled. It's one thing to have your data collected, and it's another thing if you're going to be, taken to a tribunal or a firing squad based on what you're looking up. We definitely had a big or a generous spike, let's say, in Iran recently after Twitter was banned. Talked about that in the last episode of Dark News. And, just one thing that I'll add there too, if you want to be able to help the third world in terms of defending their privacy from their governments and from bad actors, there are a few things that you can do. You can act as a relay in the Tor network. The Tor network always needs more relays. In particular, they need high bandwidth relays to make sure that it's not too slow of a network to use. If you don't have great bandwidth or you don't want to share your bandwidth, you can also contribute to hosting projects that are dedicated just for Tor hosting. So if you Google for Tor hosting, you will find some hits for that, and you can donate to those projects, and they put that money towards supporting bandwidth on the Tor network. In some cases, I think this may be starting to happen in Iran as well, and in isolated cases in China, the governments will actually ban access to Tor. And the way that they do that is, in order to connect to the Tor network, you need to actually have a list of IP addresses that you can connect to as the first hop in connecting to the Tor network. And that list necessarily has to be public. So if they just block access to all of those IP addresses, that can block your access to Tor. So the solution to that is to have bridges. Bridges are a way of connecting to the Tor network, but these bridges are not put out in a public list in the same way, and so it's more difficult to block them. I'm not entirely clear on how the Tor network defends on blocking access to bridges. The obvious way to do it is if you live in China or Iran and you have a friend that lives somewhere in the world that doesn't block access to Tor, you can have them run a personal bridge for you, and always connect through them, and that should work because the China is probably not going to find your friend in particular as long as he's not also running a public relay for the Tor network as well. Next, and possibly final question, how big is the Tor network? That is a good question. So we do have some limited metrics on the size of the network and so forth. So it's actually a lot smaller than you might expect. So there are a lot of users around the world, but the vast majority of them are simply using the Tor network. They're not participating. They're not forwarding on traffic for the rest of the Tor network. And in a lot of cases, that's because they simply don't have good enough bandwidth to really make that appealing for that kind of participation. So if we look at this Tor metrics portal page, we can see right now in the last few months there's been around 5,000 relays. Relays, again, are these these nodes in the Tor network that bounce the traffic around. And we've got around 2,000 to 3,000 bridges to help people connect if they're being censored. There's a number of different things that you can measure with respect to the Tor network. So there's also some graphs related to different statuses, possible statuses for these relays. We've got some stats on what versions of Tor that they're running, what platforms they're running on, mostly Linux. Total bandwidth of Tor network is not as high as you might expect. So it's a global network with quite a few users, but they're actually running in a few gigabits per second. So last few months between 60 or 6.5 gigabits and 8 gigabits right now, seems to be going up over time. Also got some data about exit nodes and so forth. Guard nodes are interesting. So guards are so in the Tor network you have nodes that you connect to for the first time. You have and those could just be regular relays, or they could be bridges and so forth. Then you have relays that bounce the traffic around a bunch, and then you have exit nodes. Guard nodes are a type of node that you connect to for the first time, and they are motivated. They're a special type. So what you do with a guard node is you use it to connect to the Tor network, and you use it for a while, like weeks or months maybe. And you use the same guard to get into the Tor network. And the reason for that, so the guards are not, so it says that you can be a guard and an exit node. So the idea with the guards is basically, if you always have people connecting to different nodes every single time they connect to the Tor network, then over time they will end up connecting to a very large percentage of all the different nodes are out there. And we know that some of the nodes are malicious. We know that some of them are messing with traffic. We know that some of them are collecting and recording traffic. So if you have a guard that you use over a period of time, and these malicious nodes are a relatively small percentage, right? So if you use the same guard as a relay over a long period of time, then there's a small chance that one of these guards is going to be malicious, and that's kind of bad for you. But it's only a small chance, whereas if you are constantly using different nodes all the time, the chance that you're eventually going to run into one of these malicious ones is pretty high. And it can be dangerous when you run into a malicious node. They could be serving up malware and so forth, and attacking your Tor software or your web browser or your mail client or whatever. So what they basically figured out is that if they put these guards in place and encourage people to use the same one every time for a long period of time, then that decreases everyone's overall risk that they're going to be stuck with one of these malicious nodes. Tails right now does not support the use of guards, and the reason is because it's a live configuration operating system. So you're booting into Tails. When you turn it off, everything gets wiped out. Nothing persists, and so there's no way for you to record which guard you would continue to use in the future. There has been some talk about them adding some support through that. They do have. You can create kind of persistent volumes that you can store on a USB drive and using Tails. I think only some people use that for Tails, and but they're sort of hesitant to jump on board with this guard stuff. What places in the world are the NSA focusing most on? Would it be safer to go through a node in Africa instead of Europe? That's a very interesting question. So of course we don't know exactly what the NSA is doing in real time. You'd have to work for the NSA to know that for sure. Based on the reports that we see, it seems that the NSA is very significantly tasked with supporting war efforts. So the United States right now is at war with Iraq. It's at war with Afghanistan. There are operations in Pakistan. So a lot of their focus is on targeting individuals that are supposedly part of terrorist networks in those specific countries and supporting the troops that have been deployed in those areas, or drones, as it were. I would definitely say that doing traffic through one of those countries would, for sure, you can bank on them recording a lot of that traffic in those countries. Now, it's also very clear that the NSA is collecting a lot of traffic all over the world, in the United States, in their NATO allies, in Europe, and so there are not necessarily a lot of great choices to be using to connect to the Tor network and just to keep your traffic more private and out of the NSA hands. I think you can never really guarantee that any location in the world is going to be completely out of the reach of an organization like the NSA. And keep in mind, the NSA is not the only spy agency out there. It's probably the most powerful and advanced one. Certainly the best funded one, but it's not the only one out there. And they even have sort of spy agency adversaries. The NSA has very little collaboration with the Chinese cyber army, even though they do pretty similar things in their own jurisdictions. So I don't know if there's any one fantastic place in the world to be in terms of your internet traffic. A couple places that come to mind off the top of my head, I think that Brazil has made some political changes where they are pretty upset with the United States government, and they've been trying to root out the NSA out of their internet traffic. I think that Iceland is an interesting country to look at. Their political system is friendly to internet freedom in some respects, and so that's another possibility. I don't know. There must be VPNs that allow you to connect to the internet through Iceland or through Brazil. I don't know of any off the top of my head, but I think that would be very interesting. And I imagine that we will see more and more VPNs popping up around the world in places that seem to be kind of data havens or internet havens. And we'll see existing VPNs opening up options in those locations and moving their companies to those locations. I think that Edward Snowden really sparked something with what he's revealed so far. And one last question, this should be a quick one. Have you tried the pre-release Ethereum client yet? And do you think that it will incorporate any Tor-like functionality? Simple answer is no, I haven't tried it yet. But I would like to just talk very briefly, perhaps ignorantly, about Ethereum and privacy. So there has been some talk of using Ethereum smart contracts to do kind of mixing type stuff. I've even seen a thread where people are talking about possibly implementing zero coin or zero cash as smart contracts in Ethereum. And I think, we're really going to have to see the technology mature before we know exactly what's going to happen with Ethereum and privacy. But I do have some questions about this. So let's say you do implement some kind of mixing service in Ethereum with smart contracts. I guess two questions that come to mind. Number one, would you be able to do something like zero cash, given that it's fairly resource intensive, and that Ethereum is not really built to run sophisticated software. Like, you're never going to be running, I shouldn't say never, but nowhere in the near future will you be running, your your Call of Duty on the Ethereum network. It's not intended. It would just be too expensive, and it's really not nearly efficient enough. Any kind of blockchain technology, including Bitcoin and Ethereum, it's very difficult to make it scale well. And the idea of running programs in the blockchain, it's a very inefficient data structure for doing stuff like that. And so I'm not sure whether we'd be able to cost effectively do something like that in Ethereum. And the other question that I have is, well, if you have privacy for mixing stuff using Ethereum smart contracts, well, if you don't have privacy about who created the smart contract and so forth, then that may sort of undo some of the privacy that you would get mixing with Ethereum smart contract. So I'd be curious to see how they will address those kinds of issues. I haven't really seen a privacy focus in Ethereum. I'm a bit concerned about that because I think that Bitcoin is really behind in terms of Ethereum. In terms of privacy, and I don't want to see. I'm not really interested in seeing new cryptocurrencies, new blockchain technologies that have even less privacy than Bitcoin potentially. In terms of Tor-like functionality, certainly it would be possible to connect to Ethereum network through Tor. In terms of them routing traffic in a Tor-like way, I don't want to rule it out as a possibility, but I just want to point out that the blockchain data structure already has some very substantial efficiency issues, and so to add additional routing protocols on top of that, like Tor, would introduce significant performance hit to the already bulky data structure of the blockchain. So I don't know, but I wouldn't assume that this is something that's technically feasible right now. Next question. In your book, you mention how transactions are forever, more or less, and thus hackers or NSA can retroactively go back and look at it. Is the same true for Tor? With Tails, you mentioned nothing is saved since it is live, so is Tor stored? Interesting question. So yes, absolutely, the blockchain is forever. It's a permanent record. And one of the challenges of using Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency privately is that whatever technology that you use to achieve that privacy is locked in time because it's permanently recorded. There's a record that's given out for free to anyone that wants to get a copy of it. And let's say 10 years from now, someone wants to go back and look at the blockchain and see what kind of information they can gather out of it. Well, their technology has been improving for 10 years, and whatever happened in the blockchain is locked in time. So you do get into this issue of being sort of like, the Native Americans firing bows at the people that have the machine gun technology. So that's definitely a challenge with privacy and cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. I think the answer to this, the best thing that we can do is to come up with approaches that are mathematically provable or verifiable of their efficacy. So rather than just saying, well, we're going to change this stuff around, right now it seems like it should be pretty difficult to figure out what we're changing around. Rather than taking that approach, what you really want to do is you want to say, we're going to run this kind of algorithm or protocol or whatever, and we get the security guarantees from that. Just like with encryption, where you get a security guarantee that if someone wants to brute force this algorithm, they either need to find new weaknesses if they want to brute force it, then it's going to take this number of years at this number of cycles and so forth in order to brute force it. And maybe they'll find some cryptographic weaknesses in the algorithm, but once you've studied the heck out of it, then the chance of that happening becomes less and less over time. So with Tor, here's the deal. So Tor doesn't have a blockchain. It doesn't have that kind of permanent record, but it's certainly possible for someone like the NSA to keep a permanent record of traffic that they identify as belonging to the Tor network. and then they can retroactively go back and try to take their techniques and analyze the data that they're capturing. And I think in a lot of cases, they are just capturing raw internet traffic data, and they sift through that on a real-time basis. But I think they're keeping everything because they know that they can go back and take a look at it later and learn more about looking at that information. So that's definitely a danger. Tor has in fact had some, it's had vulnerabilities and weaknesses identified with the way that it's operated. Tor has upgraded the key space that they use for encrypting their traffic over time. So at one point they used a key that was, I think, half the size of the one that you use for the current version of Tor, and so any traffic that was encrypted and routed with Tor during that time period is going to be that much easier to decrypt by an organization like the NSA. I couldn't say for sure whether, how soon they would be able to decrypt that kind of information, but yes, absolutely, there is the potential for something like that to happen. I'm also not aware of any, like court examples where it came out in court that the government, went back. They looked at some traffic related to Tor use from a few years ago before they upgraded the key space. They decrypted it, and then they went after someone in court or targeted someone militarily or anything like that. I don't know if this would end up getting leaked or not, or whether it would come out in court. State secrets are a tricky thing, but so those are my thoughts on Tor and the dangers of it. Ideally what you want to have with encryption is kind of forward secrecy, meaning that if someone encrypts a particular segment of your communication, it doesn't help them communicate it doesn't help them decrypt. Let me make sure I got that whole sentence right. If someone decrypts part of your communication, forward secrecy means that it will not help them decrypt future communication of yours. So they can only decrypt that little segment, and it's not going to give them the whole rest of your communications up until the present. So that's ideally what you want for encryption. And if you want to make sure that you are good for as long as possible in terms of encryption, you just want to use the biggest damn key sizes that you can possibly get away with. You want to use the most robust algorithms that you possibly can. You want to make sure that your software is not supporting these older algorithms. One of the ways that NSA and lots of other hackers undermine encryption is that they will trick your software into using very old encryption schemes that are known to be weak and breakable and so forth. So those are the ways that's the best that you can possibly do with encryption, is just to kind of maximize the technology that you're using right now and hope that it stands up to the test of time. Of course, the encryption that was used, in World War II by any place right now would be a complete cakewalk for your average computer science student to decrypt. So there's probably no such thing as permanent secrecy, permanent encryption. The best that we can hope to do is to figure out, what are the trends, how fast is decryption, cryptanalysis moving, how long do we need to keep our secrets for, and let's try to shoot for making sure that those two times do not overlap. That's really the best that we can do when it comes to encryption. So that will do it for today's episode of Dark News Live for April 1st, 2014. Thanks so much for your fantastic questions and for your support of the show. And we will be back next week with another episode.